DeSanto Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy, family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574 today. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Against the Boards. It is a good day for Finger Lakes hockey, let me tell you what. And we're going to start out right and quick with the Rochester Americans, who last night with their 4-2 win over the Thunderbirds clinched the playoffs earlier than they have in quite some time for the Rochester Americans. 40 wins for the first time since the 2018-19 season. Never in the Seth Appert era did this squad get to that number, which is just something interesting to note. I feel like we've seen so much success from this Amerks squad over the last few years. It's almost surprising to see them winning in such an emphatic way so many times throughout the regular season. And on a Wednesday night, ultimately, it came down to the guys that it seemingly came down to all season long. Devin Levi and Isak Rosayan end up being the ones to come up big in the end. Levi with a massive double save late in that third period, and Isak Rosayan with the big time goal to win the game on absolutely no angle. Got the call back down to Rochester in the morning yesterday, and then ends up burying an absolute beauty for the Amerks to win that one. The fourth goal of that game we'll get to in just a second, of course, but the Amerks go down 2-1 at the end of the first period, and in the second, it was Anton Wahlberg. Just enough pressure ultimately from the Amerks down towards the front of the Thunderbirds net, and Wahlberg gets a quick little backhand, roofs it into the upper netting off of a rebounded shot, and ties the game through 40 minutes, ultimately for a low number of fans in Blue Cross Arena in this one, but the Amerks pull it even, and then in the third, Rosayan, as we said, that no-angle shot to score the game winner, and late on in the game, Noah Ostlund scores the empty netter for the Amerks, and you might be thinking, why is it relevant that we're talking about the empty netter right now? Because now Noah Ostlund has the longest active scoring streak of any Rochester American player with 6 straight games with a goal. Of course, he was the AHL Rookie of the Month in the month of March, and continuing on that stretch just a little bit with that empty netter late, which it's always fun when you see a guy who is trying to keep that streak going score the empty netter late, because there's so much more excitement for every player on the ice around that goal happening. Everyone was super hyped for Ostlund coming in, giving him hugs and, bringing him to the bench. But normally on an empty netter at the end of a game like that, you just see a wave of relief wipe over the team, and that seemingly was not the case ultimately for Ostlund there. It was much more excitement for the whole team after that one happened. So a 4-2 win, and of course we head into the press conference after. I unfortunately was not there, plenty of weather and situations with the game yesterday, but checking into that press conference with Coach Leone after, no surprise on the first question of it. Just another game. They're glad to have it over with, but there's still more hockey games to be played, and this team still wants to stack up more wins to get the best playoff position and not just be in the dance. They obviously know that being in the dance is important, and it's awesome and all of that, but it doesn't much matter to be in it if you're then in the bottom spot playing less home games than anyone else and what have you. So ultimately, they understand they still have to play out the rest of the season. And now we'll take a look to what the rest of that season looks like for the Rochester Americans. And it starts with the Belleville Senators on a back-to-back away this weekend, and then another game against Belleville on Wednesday next week. So getting super familiar with their North Division rivals, but that is the start of the closeout of the season, really. Those 3 are 3 of the last 7 games of the regular season for the Rochester Americans. As we said, first 2 are going to be on the road, but as we look back to the matchups with Belleville so far from this season and kind of what we can potentially expect from a matchup with this team, they played twice in the month of February, and that's the only time they've played so far in 2025, actually. It was a 4-0 win for the Amerks at home in the beginning of February, and then in the latter half of the month, a 6-3 win in that big stretch of consecutive games. Meanwhile, in 2024, in December, it was back-to-back wins, 7-4 and 8-2. They've definitely had their way with the Senators so far this season, but now as you get into the late stages of the year, you've got a team that knows that they haven't been able to get the Amerks numbers so far to this point, taking them on in their home barn. Definitely a situation where Belleville will look to try to take advantage, but the Amerks have to know they can't let any rust start to set in when there's only 7 games of the regular season left for them. So, as we said, with that being 7 games, only 4 of them are at home. So if you want to get into a regular season game before the end of the year, Wednesdays against Belleville next week, and then the following week against Cleveland, and then a couple of Friday home games as well. Not this upcoming Friday, but the week following, they're going to be taking on Laval. Definitely a playoff preview game per chance, or ideally for the Amerks, not a playoff preview, hoping somebody can knock off Laval before they get to Rochester. And then a matchup against the Marlies in a home and away stretch just to end that regular season there. Definitely would recommend that April 11th matchup if you're free on that Friday to get out there and see the Amerks play against Laval. No doubt their most competitive game of the regular season that remains, and it'll be interesting to see how those 2 teams match up only 3 games before the playoffs will start. But, of course, the Amerks 40 wins for the first time since the 18-19 season. Cooking with gas right now, and a major factor of that, as we said, Devin Levi in cage and Isak Rosayan scoring on the offensive end. Has a chance to get up to 30 goals on the season, and he would be the first Amerk to score 30 goals since Victor Olofsson. Just taking us back a little bit also to that 2018 timeline. That does it for Amerks talk, but we're going to stay on the hockey wave because the reason my weekend and week was so busy and intense is because the Hobart Statesmen are 3-time national champions in Division III hockey. It was one of the most wild games I've ever witnessed in my entire life on Sunday last weekend at the Nexus Center in Utica. Obviously, that game sells out in 2 minutes when Utica wins in overtime against Curry on Friday. And we knew exactly what we were going to get into, likely just because of the way that Utica played against Curry earlier in the weekend. The Pioneers tried to run their Cinderella story at home all the way through the championship, and they took it deep into overtime. 18 minutes and 24 seconds of overtime was played before the Statesmen did exactly what they've been doing all season long, rolling 4 lines and forechecking like literally nobody else on the face of the earth. And ultimately, all it took was a dump in from the red line by one of their defenders late in the first overtime period, took a perfect bounce off the back wall and shot ahead of the goal line, and Khalil Fontana was able to float right onto it in the slot, had one defender to beat, and then knew that he had to just get that puck far away from the goalie in Piros, who was a freshman goalie for Utica that played completely out of his mind and should 100% get his flowers and his credit. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the Hobart Statesmen were built for this. Khalil Fontana works his way down into the slot and takes that full forehand shot, keeps it on the ice, and buries it past the glove side of Piros. And just such an insane moment. I talked for a minute and a half after this happened on air, screaming my head off. And I won't lie, I completely blacked out and had no idea what I said until somebody played it back for me the next day. This was just one of the coolest hockey moments I've ever had the chance to be a part of. Fontana just completely laid out, had to take that shot 2 times as he actually initially fanned on it and then finally smacks it through. Just there was an opening the entire way and he saw it and he was trying to not bait Piros into filling that space and ultimately works out for the Statesmen. They are back-to-back national champions 3 times in a row. Kansas City couldn't three-peat this year, but Hobart could. And ultimately, it was a simply outrageous game. And I bring this up almost more so for the preview of the hopes to have Mark Taylor in studio next week, the head coach of the Hobart Statesmen, over 430 career wins as a Division III hockey coach. Hopefully in studio next week, and we can talk to him everything about this season, about the run. I'm hoping we can potentially get some players in as well. We'll have to see how it shakes out, but ultimately definitely want to just be able to talk to Mark Taylor about some of his hockey philosophies and how he feels that this season went as a whole. Ultimately, can't talk about the Statesman season without talking about Damon Beaver in cage. The dude literally got cut by a skate in the second period, skated over to the bench with a blood crew behind him, scraping up his blood off of the ice, got 2 pieces of tape put on his thumb, and went right back onto the ice and kept playing in the rest of the game. It was outrageous. He goes over 35 saves on the day for the Statesmen, and ultimately, in my opinion, is the player of the game. But of course, media giving the most outstanding player of the tournament award to the man who scored the game winner in Khalil Fontana. So the Hobart Statesmen complete the three-peat. They end their season 28-1-1. Just simply dominant. No other way to put it. They outshot literally every single opponent that they played this year. It was almost a stupid year of hockey to watch. But my lucky shoes came in clutch, and I will be banking on those lucky shoes until they fail me, so I will not be wearing them for Hobart lacrosse season. We're just going to avoid that entirely. But that does it for Hobart Statesman Talk. Like we said, hopefully next week in studio, we're going to have an interview with Mark Taylor for you. But now time to shift gears to the team that will be playing at home this weekend in Rochester, and that is, of course, the Rochester Knighthawks, who have been climbing up the standings and sitting at the top of those power rankings pretty consistently in the NLL this season. And it feels like everything really started to come to fruition with the big-time win last weekend against the San Diego Seals. With 10 seconds left to go in the game, Ryan Smith snipes the game winner, but of course the team still has to go out there and defend for 10 more seconds, and I think the offense's reaction on the bench says it all about how these Knighthawks felt about the win. Of course, have to close it out, and who else to close it out but Rylan Hartley and co. And with a defender down at that point, with Rylan Reese going out, the Knighthawks are able to close things down, pull out the 14-13 win after playing the first half like they did throughout their entirety of their win streak to this point, just dominating through the first half of play. Then San Diego showed that they're a better team than most of the squads that the Knighthawks have faced off with to this point in the season. And they came back and they tied things up. And ultimately, in the final minute, the Knighthawks were able to play the full 60-minute effort and pull out the win thanks to that insane Ryan Smith goal. But before we got to that Ryan Smith goal, we had to get through that game, and there were a couple moments of vindication for me sitting in my hotel in Utica watching the game because I unfortunately was stuck just too far away from Rochester to be at this one in person. One of the most impressive moments of the game, without a shadow of a doubt, was Graydon Hogg's caused turnover and what turned into the secondary assist on one of Smitty's goals to make it a 7-3 game. they ended up calling it the connection of the game or connection of the weekend, rather, not even just connection of the game. The NLL posted this in collaboration with the Rochester Knighthawks, and I feel like you just got to watch it to fully understand the play. There's the goal from Smith at the end of the clip, but it all starts out with Hogg intercepting and then gets mugged, has to one-handed pass while fixing his helmet to Connor Fields, and who else do you want to be able to get that ball to other than Connor Fields and a streaking Ryan Smith to come away with that play? Just right here, the interception at midfield, gets tossed, has to fix his helmet while one-handed throwing that. Just so impressive from a rookie. And ultimately for someone that was an Albany Great Dane, being able to toss that off right to Connor Fields, so much confidence that he knew that ball would end up in the back of the net. And just, I feel like that play right there is the epitome of why Graydon Hogg continues week after week to push Turner Evans out of the lineup for him to make it. Just showing those little extra juice plays that he can make, not even in the offensive set. It's just so awesome from a rookie, seeing him add to his game week after week. Definitely not in contention for the rookie of the year. I think there's probably about 3 or 4 guys right now that are strongly in that conversation. And of course, again, 2 of them are in Albany this season, but still, for a rookie, stringing together a really impressive season. The other guy who's had a really impressive season is the man who leads the entire NLL in goals right now, and that was the Gatorade Player of the Week last week, and the man who you just saw score that goal at the end, Ryan Smith, comes away with a 6-point night, mirroring his best friend in Ryan Lanchberry, who had 1 goal and 6 assists. Smitty ends with 5 goals and 1 assist, and he just could do no wrong. I mean, it was evident from the beginning of this game to me that all this team had to do was put the ball into Ryan Smith's stick, and he would find a way to get the ball into the back of the net past Chris Origlieri. Just simply an awesome game of lacrosse from him specifically as a shooter. He just was getting to the inside and was catching passes that he hasn't at different points this season, but ultimately everything was just clicking at the highest point for Smith throughout that game. And at the end of the day, it was really nice to have a guy that you could tell was clicking like that. So then in the final 30 seconds, you know exactly whose stick that ball needs to end up in at the end of the game. And obviously we had Hazen's press conference earlier today. I talked to him about that specifically. Connor Fields still has 5 points in this game, but it's a 3-2. It's kind of quieter than normal for him. And ultimately, you have so many guys that can fill that one role that is the strength of this Knighthawks team. And that was kind of what Hazen talked about, is just at any point, any one of 6 guys on this offense can just score 4 goals or score 5 points. So ultimately, there's not really that worry when maybe McConvey doesn't have a great day, or when maybe Fields doesn't have a great day in comparison to where he's been at so far throughout this season. And Smitty definitely filled that void, or filled that spot. Not a void necessarily, but filled it well for the Knighthawks in that game against San Diego. Now, this weekend, they'll have to take on Ottawa again. And if it wasn't a trap game before, it definitely is a trap game now, because the Knighthawks are in the exact opposite situation that they were in last year, 2 years ago, over the last 2 seasons. I always get mixed up with the fact that I covered a different team last year, and it throws my brain off just a little bit too much. But ultimately, this Knighthawks team at one point was looking at a 3% chance of making the playoffs, and did. Now they have a 90% chance of making the playoffs. But ultimately, if they lose both of these games and other things go perfectly for other teams, they can still not make the playoffs. So it's very interesting to see a team that has been on the exact flip side of this scenario that they're in now get put into this scenario, because they get it and they know that these games still completely matter. So I don't think that they will get caught in the trap per se. But with that said, there's still a Jeff Teat that has to get stopped on one end of the still a Jeff Teat that has to get stopped on one end of the floor, and still a Zach Higgins that has to get passed on the other end of the floor. So ultimately, we'll just have to kind of wait and see. But I'm definitely not going to go against what I've been doing for our predictions here. As we said, I'm a superstitious guy. Now, I will say, to just preface everyone right now, I don't think when we get to Toronto that I'll be giving a prediction, just because I don't want to jinx more than anything. But as we go into this one, I definitely don't think that we're going to see a low-scoring affair. It's just not. Off of a game like that last week, I don't think there's any way, unless the Knighthawks hit 15 pipes in the first 30 minutes, which is always possible. Of course, now that I said it, I feel like I should knock on some wood somewhere. We'll just okay, we're good. But ultimately, this Knighthawks team is not shooting a low enough clip right now or percentage for them to be in a game where they score less than 11 goals. Yeah, I'm knocking on wood again. That was just, I'm really saying a lot right now. But this feels like, again, that 15 to 14 range. I will also say that, yes, 17-15 was a really high score, and 13-14 was not that. But I'd say I'm still definitely in the realm on that 13 to 14 scoreline being around where we expected. So I'm taking last week's prediction as a win in my book. But ultimately, I think we end up with a score that's very similar to that, at least for the Knighthawks in this game. I think the key for them, as it's been throughout this entire stretch, is you shut down the best player on the team. And shutting down Jeff Teat does not mean shutting down completely. It means allowing him to have maybe a hat trick and maybe 2 assists. A 5-point night is shutting down Jeff Teat. So if they can do that and force the secondary scoring to be where they get their goals from, then that entire Ottawa team is starting to dig a little bit more for where they're going to find that scoring. So ultimately, shutting down Jeff Teat is the key, and putting shots on Higgins is the other key to get that change again, ultimately. So we'll sit with a prediction of, I can't bring myself to pick the Knighthawks after the way that every week has been going. This is a hard spot for me, I won't lie. Can't find a way to pick the Knighthawks with the way that our streaks have been going. But it is really hard for me to say that there's a scenario where Ottawa does win this game. So I guess what we will do is say, for prediction's sake, this game ends 9-8 Ottawa, because I think that's the only way that Ottawa can actually pull this one out. Now, if you're confused as to why I'm picking Ottawa, just go to the end of any other episode where we've had a Knighthawks game, and I think you'll understand where we're going with that. But yeah, that's just the only way I can find a way to bring myself to that outcome. The Knighthawks are running hot. They've played against literally the 4 best teams in the NLL now this season. Against the bottom 2 of those 4, they have won 2 and lost 1 by 1 goal. All of them by 1 goal. Won both of those games by a 1-goal margin, lost 1 game by a 1-goal margin. And against the top 2 teams in the NLL, they played 4 times and lost all 4 of those games, but they were either early in the season or off of a bye. So ultimately, can you ask for a better situation right now? Sure. You could ask for a game against Buffalo in the last 2 weeks of the season to see where both of these teams actually are right now, because Buffalo definitely looks like they're trending down and Knighthawks look like they're trending up. But ultimately, we don't get that. They just got to play against Jeff Teat, and then they got to not get trapped against a team that is clearly tanking for the number 1 overall pick in this draft. And then they'll be in the playoffs, and I'm excited for the fact that there is a chance of home Rochester playoff lacrosse. It just feels like it's been so far away. And at a time when it feels like it could truly start to be the Knighthawks' time. But I do think that they have to beat one of the teams that they lost to in the regular season to really show that. And by that, I mean specifically Buffalo, Saskatchewan, or probably Colorado. Given Colorado's been trending very much downwards, they might be the one that comes to Rochester in that situation in the first round of the playoffs. But ultimately, I think they need another win against a team that this season they have lost to really show me at least that they are ready for that next step. I just have too much PTSD about going to Buffalo and watching them get 20 burgered by the Bandits in the first round when everything looked so high for this team. So we'll still just wait to see it ultimately out of the Knighthawks. But they play on Saturday at 7 p.m. at Seeger and Shortino Field. I will be there for that one. Won't be able to be at pregame because I will be broadcasting some Hobart lacrosse as they face off with Richmond on Saturday at noon. But we will be there for that Knighthawks game that night, and then we'll be at the Belleville game on Wednesday next week, most likely as well, barring broadcast issues. So that's going to do it for us, though, this week with Against the Boards. The Amerks facing off against Belleville on the road this weekend. The Knighthawks taking on Ottawa at home. Just a matchup with the Senators, staff over there, it seems like, on the weekend for Rochester a little bit, but should ultimately be a good one. And that's going to do it for this week on Against the Boards. Thanks to my producer, Paul Russo. I've been Chamberlain Bauder. We'll see you next week.